Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. We are live in our Facebook group, Plant-Based and Stress-Free, also on Instagram at alter.health. And this is your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Susanna Alter, and we're both naturopathic doctors who support individuals in reversing disease and reclaiming optimal health through whole food plant-based nutrition and mind-body medicine.
So we're really getting super excited about the upcoming Whole Food Plant-Based Challenge, which is happening, by the way, in the Plant-Based and Stress-Free Facebook group. It is a closed private group, but anyone is free to join. And we are sending the invite to you and those who you know and love, those who might be on the fence looking to learn more about taking their nutrition, their life, their health to the next level using plant-based whole food nutrition. So come on into the group. The challenge is an 8-day challenge. It's all free. It's just a series of Facebook Lives happening in the plant-based and stress-free group. And we're covering all things specifically related to metabolism, which, by the way, is kind of a topic of today's podcast episode on food combining, which we're going to get into in just a second. But any other news or highlights or announcements about the challenge, Susanna?
That's it. I mean, if you're interested, just head over to our website. You'll see a pop-up where you can click it and easily register. Yep. Or find us on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll help guide you to where you can sign up. Totally.
So come on in. alter.health/WFPB-challenge is the official link to register and get into the group. But anyways, now on into food combining, which was, as is the case of all the Alter Your Health live episodes, which we record on Thursdays at 1 p.m. It was a requested topic from those people who are in the plant-based and stress-free Facebook group. We do talk about food combining a bit here and there, and we certainly bring it up with our one-on-one clients and in our programs and that sort of thing, but we haven't brought it up really to any significant degree in any podcast episodes. So I think it's great to have a little time and space to talk about food combining, talk about why it matters, and to really set you up for success regardless of what your health goals, whether it's weight loss or optimizing metabolism or digestion. Those are all reasons to be mindful of food combining.
Yeah, so today we're really going to focus specifically on how food combining really optimizes digestion and metabolism.
Right, yeah.
And, this food combining, it's important in a whole food plant-based diet, but it's also important in any kind of diet that you're eating. Yeah. So really what we talk about today is going to translate to how you're eating right now, regardless of whether you're plant-based or not.
Yeah, 100%. And just to spend one brief moment talking about digestion and metabolism, these are words that we use in the holistic health medical field, and a lot of people don't really understand what digestion/metabolism is. Digestion is, as I see it, the process of breaking down food using the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestines, the large intestine, the breaking down food to be absorbed. So digestion and absorption kind of go hand in hand. But then once the food molecules or macronutrients and micronutrients are absorbed, then we start the metabolic process, the process of metabolism, which is breaking down these macro and micronutrients to create energy for your body. So that's what digestion is. That's what metabolism is. Once again, we're going to get way deep into this stuff in the Whole Food Plant-Based Challenge coming up. But why does food combining matter when we're talking about digestion and metabolism. Where should we start?
Let's start with digestion
Yeah.
because this is more basic to understand. But really, when we're talking about food combining to optimize digestion, we're in a little bit here. We're gonna actually pull up a chart on our.
Yeah, you just tell me when.
Well, I'll just introduce the idea,
Yeah.
then we'll pull it up.
Yeah,
But
for those of you
really-
who are watching the live or recorded on YouTube or Facebook or wherever.
Yeah, but so for digestion, why this is important is because there are certain types of food that take different amounts of time to break down in your stomach and your intestines. So for example, foods that are more starchy, like potatoes, don't take as long to break down as foods that are higher in lots of protein and fat, like meat, or even, like nuts and avocados and things like that. And so really the aim is to eat foods with other like foods that all digest at about the same rate in your stomach so that you prevent any kind of fermentation or just basically, if you think about it, if you were to eat some heavy meat, protein, fat, rich meal.
Yeah, let's just, throw out there. If you had a big old steak and then after your steak, you ate an apple, you'd have that steak in your stomach or intestines. All your enzymes are going to break down those proteins, that fat of that steak. There's a lot of metabolic or digestive energy that is required to break that stuff down. And then you put an apple in on top, which is really quite simple to break down. It's a lot of really, simple, basic carbohydrates. You can break it down really quickly, really easily, get that quick energy from an apple. But if we have that big hunk of meat in there, then the apple carbohydrates or fruit sugars and that sort of stuff is going to start to ferment and not be appropriately absorbed in your bloodstream to be metabolized and used to create energy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so let's pull up our little visual. And for those who are listening to the podcast, if you're interested in seeing this chart, head over to YouTube where you can see this video posted. But we've got our handy dandy food combining chart where we really show.
And it might be small. You might have to full screen it for those of you who are watching it. Yeah.
It is small. But basically, we break down food groups into the high fat, high protein foods. So these are things like meat, dairy, eggs. Also, we put oils, nuts, seeds, and avocado in this category. And then in the second category, we have our starch-based foods. So these are things like whole grains, legumes, potatoes, starchy vegetables like winter squash, corn, parsnips, and also any kind of breads or tortilla or pasta or anything like that. In the third group, we have non-starchy vegetables, which are going to be things like your leafy greens, cucumber, tomato, broccoli, cauliflower, mushrooms, radish, Brussels sprouts. You kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
These veggies that are lower in starch, lower in calories. And then finally, our fourth category is fruits. And that's very self-explanatory. Any type of fruit, berries, apples, mangoes, you get the picture.
So in this food combining chart, we've got some arrows that are signifying what goes well together and what doesn't go well together. Really, the thing that we want to drive home in this conversation and emphasize is that the high fat, high protein foods do not mix well together with the high starch foods. So think of meat and potatoes, or a donut, which is processed wheat, processed grains, deep fried in oil. So high fat and high starch, high carb.
Or mac and cheese, or a quesadilla, or a burrito with lots of rice
Meat
and
and
cheese
cheese.
and meat. And so you can see a lot of really popular dishes, like pizza too.
Pizza.
A lot of really popular dishes that a lot of people eat a lot of the time are really poorly combined foods.
Yeah, and then you're not mentioning the processed oils and refined sugars and added salt and that sort of thing that create these, perfect. The term that I use is this metabolic dilemma. You put in a bunch of fat, a bunch of protein, and a bunch of carbs all at once, and you really just don't have adequate machinery, enzymes to really take care of it all. You can eat a high carbohydrate meal, a starch-based meal, which is a whole food plant-based meal, because, by the way, spoiler alert, whole food plant-based nutrition is high in carbohydrates. Yes, we can do a lower carbohydrate whole food plant-based diet, but it's really hard to do without focusing on oils and things like that, which are processed foods. So when you're eating a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, you are eating a lot of carbohydrates. And, that's why people have this fear of carbohydrates, who shift over to the high fat, high protein food, or food group, if you will. And we really don't like using these macronutrient terms, by the way, because we do recognize that all foods, all plants, that is, have all macronutrients built into those plants. Fats, carbohydrates, and protein are in all plant foods. But animal products don't really have any carbohydrates. They are high fat, high protein. And when we mix those animal foods, like the cheese with the macaroni or something like that, then we set ourselves up to have this digestive and metabolic issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get through this chart, and then we'll talk about why food combining is so important for metabolism.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got these two food groups that we don't want to combine together, the high fat protein foods and the high starch foods. But then we also have our non-starchy vegetables. So how do these fit into the picture?
Yeah, well, they're kind of neutral.
They are neutral.
Yeah.
So these foods pair well either with the high fat, high protein foods like meat, dairy, eggs, oils, nuts, and seeds. Also, they combine really well with our starch-based foods. So if we think of some meal examples where you have perfectly combined meals, you would have, for example, like what we eat basically every night is some type of rice and bean mixture with potatoes and lots of vegetables on the side.
Yeah, and then like on the paleo side of things, like salmon and broccoli, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got your high fat, high protein salmon or steak or chicken breast or whatever it is, and then your non-starchy veggie, which is a popular kind of more healthy food combination than meat and potatoes.
Yes, if you've listened to our other podcast episodes, you know that we certainly prefer the whole food plant-based way of eating. It is,
it's more nutrient dense, more healing foods, less toxic. You get the idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
But really, if we're talking about food combining, that's kind of that neutral state of those non-starchy vegetables. They pair well with basically everything.
Yeah, and then there's fruits down here, which is in a category of their own, except they do pair okay with those non-starchy vegetables. So you can think about like fruits on top of a salad, or did you want to talk about something else first?
Well, yeah, it's just that I think it's really important to emphasize that fruits in general are best eaten by themselves. And this is because they are so quickly digested. You could have an apple 30 minutes before a big heavy meal and be fine, because fruit typically takes anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes to digest. And so, yes, they do combine with non-starchy vegetables, but it's a little more nuanced. The non-starchy vegetables should be raw. So fruit doesn't combine very well with cooked non-starchy vegetables. So, we're getting a little more into the nitty-gritty details here.
Yeah. And that being said, cooked fruit, like say a cobbler or something, a berry cobbler with some oats or something like that, that tends to combine better with some other starchy foods or non-starchy vegetables.
Yeah, so if you're looking at our chart here in YouTube, you'll see that there are a few exceptions to this rule that fruit should be eaten alone. And one of them is that when fruit is cooked, it pairs okay with some, oatmeal, for example. You could do an oatmeal bowl with some bananas and cooked apples in there, and you would probably be fine depending on your digestive capability. For people who have really kind of weakened digestive systems, I would be more conservative and say fruit's probably better eaten by itself.
Yeah, so just think about a meal of just fruit, which is totally okay and healthy, or, save fruits for just your snacks in between meals or something like that if you like to snack.
Exactly.
So anything else about this food combining chart?
Yeah, just one more example of an exception for the fruit rule. If you're eating a smoothie and you want to put in some seeds like flax seeds or chia seeds or even, a little bit of sunflower seeds, as long as it's a small amount, it should be okay for your digestive system because the blending process already kind of pre-digests a lot of those foods. So that's one more exception to bring up. But really the big take home with fruit is you don't want to combine it with a really high fat protein meal like steak and potatoes or, really high starchy food, because there's a much higher risk of that fruit fermenting in your stomach and just messing up the whole digestive process.
And fruit is so commonly served as this, quote unquote healthy dessert. And that I always refuse the dessert fruit at the end of a meal when I'm served that. I'm happy to indulge in as much fruit as I can before the meal or earlier in the day as its own meal. But whenever I'm served a bowl of fruit at the end of the meal, I'm just like, no, thank you. Unless maybe it's berries, these lower sugar, kind of lower carb fruits, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to be a little bit better for me and my digestion. But otherwise, I'll get a lot of gas, a lot of bloating.
It's so funny. We actually get a lot of grief when we decline the dessert fruit because people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
You eat fruit all day. Why won't you eat fruit now?
Yeah, people don't really get it, but maybe after they listen to this, they'll understand a little bit better why that is. And some people, I think it just has a lot to do with nuanced microbiomes and that sort of thing. Some people might tolerate different combinations a little bit better than others, but these are general rules that we for the most part live by. We recommend for people who are certainly suffering from digestive issues to consider really being mindful of how they're combining their foods, because it's really not just about what you're eating and the quality of food that you're bringing in, but also how you're eating it, the kind of the state of stress that the body might be in when we're eating food, and also the combination of foods that we bring in. So when people say, oh, I just eat fruits and vegetables and I've got all these digestive issues, well, that doesn't show me or tell me a whole lot, because I don't know the state of your physiology when you're putting those fruits and vegetables in your mouth. I also don't know the combination in which you're putting those fruits and vegetables in your mouth. And maybe also another factor is the quality of those fruits and vegetables. Are they toxic? Are they toxic, sprayed strawberries that you're eating every day? That'll make some people sick for sure. Anyway, that is enough about that then, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to hide this now. There, I did it. So, I find it really interesting that this rule, these kind of metabolic laws, if you will, of food combination, they span, like we say, they span deeper than just digestion. And if you tuned into a recent episode on the podcast, just the last episode this week with Cyrus Kambata of Mastering Diabetes, they have a program of where they support people in reversing insulin resistance, reversing type 2 diabetes, increasing insulin sensitivity of type 1 and type 1.5 diabetics. And their program is really focused on the carbohydrate-rich foods, the plant-based foods that are rich in carbohydrates. And they put the nuts and seeds, the avocados, in kind of a yellow light zone, if you will, just something to be cautious of, mindful of, and just limit a little bit for this reason, for this issue of metabolism. Because fats, especially saturated fats, and we've talked about this before, and we talk about this in the podcast with Cyrus, the accumulation of fats in the body can interfere with the proper absorption and utilization of carbohydrates and breakdown of carbohydrates to create energy. And this is otherwise known as insulin resistance. So the insulin is, that hormone that signals to unlock the door and bring in carbohydrate or glucose into the cell, and then break down that glucose to create cellular energy. But that process just doesn't work that well when there's a bunch of saturated fat, specifically gumming up that lock of the door. So, this is really important beyond just putting food in your mouth and having healthy digestive process, relieving gas and bloating. This really is extremely important when it comes to each and every cell of your body, making sure that it's properly, adequately being fueled and converting glucose, which is the preferred cell of every cell, or preferred fuel of every cell in your body. We want to convert that glucose into cellular energy, and excess fat just simply gets in the way. So I wanted to bring up just real briefly this other chart that Ray Cronise and Juliana Hever, the plant-based dietitian, both of them came up with this. I actually don't know if it was Ray or Juliana or both. What does it say down there?
It says Ray.
It says, so we'll credit Ray Cronise for now, who was also a past guest on the Alter Your Health podcast, and so is Juliana. And they kind of created this food triangle. So for those of you who are watching once again on YouTube or on Facebook, this food triangle kind of points to similar things that we're pointing out in our food combining chart, but they try and separate out the macronutrients a little bit more and just focus on the non-starchy veggies at the top of the triangle. And then going down the right side of the triangle is increasing energy density of carbohydrate into the fruits and the nuts and the legumes and the starchy vegetables. And that's kind of an increased density of carbohydrates down to the right. And then down on the left is increasing density of fat. Because we're recognizing that leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, all of these non-starchy vegetables have all macronutrients: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And then as they increase in energy density in fat side, we get to our animal products, our meat, eggs, dairy, poultry, shellfish, etc.
And just for our listeners, because I don't know if we actually painted the picture of this diagram for you, imagine a triangle where at the top of the triangle, there's a category that says leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, mushrooms, and
just
onions.
Think non-starchy vegetables.
Exactly. And then down on the left side is a little bubble that says meat, eggs, dairy, poultry, fish, etc. And then on the right side, the right bottom corner of the triangle is fruits, cereals, legumes, starchy vegetables, like more carbohydrate-rich foods.
Yeah. So they, Juliana and Ray, they've got this saying that they always say. They say, "Eat right." And it's kind of a play on words. It's like eat correctly, eat properly, but also eat on the right side of this triangle. That is the plant-based side of the triangle. Now, a close second, the second best way of eating is eating left, which is like a paleo diet. You think about, once again, it's not combining the meat or the steak and the potatoes. It's not combining the high carb and the high fat foods. But eating left, you can, or I'm looking at myself, so I need to do this way, even though I'm flipped. That was just anyways. So when you eat left, you're eating kind of a paleo diet, which is better for the metabolism, yes, but it's not going to be as nutrient dense. You're still going to be introducing high amounts of saturated fat and toxins potentially, and that sort of thing. And then when you do want to have your potato, when you do want to have your piece of fruit, when you do want to have kind of a nutrient dense whole food starch based food, then you're not going to be able to metabolize that food as well, because you're developing a level of insulin resistance due to the fact that you're eating a lot of saturated fat down the left side of the triangle. So that being said, they've also got this little bubble of nuts and seeds that you might notice if you're watching once again, that's close to the plant-based foods because nuts and seeds are plant-based. But within that nuts and seeds, we know that that's a majority mainly fat. But the nuts and seeds are over on the right side of the triangle because A, they're plants and that's where they belong with their fellow plant brothers and sisters. And also nuts and seeds are mainly unsaturated fats. They're different fats. Not all fat is created equally. So nuts and seeds are different than saturated fats. Yeah, nuts and seeds have some saturated fat in them, but animal products are much higher, higher concentration of saturated fat, which is when we're talking about this metabolic conversation, which is more problematic for our metabolism.
Yeah. And so we talked about one consequence of eating this in this metabolic dilemma fashion, like
where you
Ben
eat
calls
on the bottom, looking at this triangle once again, the meat, eggs, dairy, and the potatoes, high starch vegetables, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So one of the consequences of eating this way is that insulin resistance. But another consequence, and this is a big topic of our whole food plant-based challenge coming up, is also weight gain. Weight gain is a direct consequence of having a metabolism that's just gunked up by this poor combination of foods. And what happens in addition to us not being the cells not being as sensitive to insulin, which is directly going to increase your blood sugar. But also, if we think about how the body wants to break down food, carbohydrates are the easiest macronutrient to digest. So the cells prefer using carbohydrates as fuel.
And they not only do they use carbohydrates as fuel whenever there's carbohydrates around, which is 99.99% of the time, unless we're starving.
Exactly. So if you eat a meal that has a lot of both carbohydrates and fat, then your body's first going to break down the carbohydrates and get all of the energy that it needs from that, albeit it won't be as efficiently burned as if it would be if it was more of a strictly carbohydrate meal. But your body's actually going to get probably enough energy from breaking down all of that carbohydrate, and then what's left over is the fat, which takes a little bit more energy to break down. And if your body's already gotten enough calories, enough energy for that moment, then the body's going to do what it knows what to do best, which is to store energy for later. And it's going to store that energy as fat because that's the form that it's already in.
Yeah, so a lot of people say, oh, if you eat too many carbohydrates, then it gets stored as fat. And it's like, well, that might be true in some, we'll get into this in the plant-based challenge, whole food plant-based challenge. But really what gets stored as fat so much more easily than carbohydrates is fat, because it's fat. We take it in, or we burn the carbohydrates of the meal, and then we put the fat in the fat tissue. It's really as simple as that. So that's enough about diagrams, and that's enough about food combining and digestion and metabolism. What else?
I just want to say we got into some pretty nuanced stuff. The big take-home message is don't combine a lot of fatty, high-protein foods with a lot of carbohydrate-rich foods. And it's best to eat fruit by itself.
Yes, that is a really good, summary of the take-home message. And the great thing about eating a whole food plant-based diet is that, once again, for the most part, whole food plant-based nutrition is mainly carbohydrate, high fiber rich foods. So we don't really have to worry ourselves too much about this food combining thing until we get to fruit and if we eat a lot of oils and nuts and seeds and tons of avocados and that sort of thing, then the conversation gets a little bit more important. But when we're eating plants, we can rest assured that our metabolism is going to be optimized and everything's going to be happy inside. So that's all we've got for today, right?
Yes, and just a reminder, if any of you out there want to dig into this in more depth in a one-on-one conversation with either myself or Dr. Benjamin, we welcome you to schedule a free complimentary 15-minute consultation with us online.
Yep, we've got some openings in our practice. And also, just another reminder, come on into the plant-based and stress-free Facebook group. That's where all the magic happens, and we hope to see you in there. So peace and love, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye for now.